I wanted the show. I wanted everything to do with it, or so I thought. I wanted to be out there like all the rest of the guys that were coming back and already sporting combat action ribbons and medals and, chalking up their resume of I've been there once, twice, I'm on my third tour, and I hadn't even been yet. And I'm like, well, I want that, right? That's what I'm here for. I'm a Marine. That's what I'm living for right now. This is the career path I've chosen. I'm scared as hell, but I think I'm as good as anybody else. That I can go and do this. And then I got what I asked for. When I was there in 2006, 2007 timeframe, we had this idea that we were going to give the Iraqis Ford F-250 trucks, and they were going to use them for law enforcement, right? So on Al Assad, this massive air base in the middle of the desert in the Anbar province, 60 or so miles to the west of Baghdad. You got this oasis out there, and in this corner of the base, there were some like 300 or so brand new Ford F-250 trucks, compliments of the taxpayer. And the only thing that was wrong with them is they had about an inch of dust on them because the sand is always blowing. But they were immaculate, brand new, still had the stickers in the windows. And I'll never forget seeing them the first time. And I'm like, what's up with these trucks? And they were to be part of the Iraqi law enforcement program that we were establishing. They were going to be used for and by the law enforcement guys. And thanks, America, for donating those trucks. I never saw that program come to fruition. The reason why that program didn't come to fruition because it was, which comes first, egg or chicken discussion. The Iraqis we didn't want to give them the trucks because we were afraid the trucks would get blown up by IEDs on the roads. Okay, well, then you got to put your police guys out there on the roads to make sure that nobody's putting IEDs in the ground. Well, we're not going to put our guys out there because we don't want them to get blown up. But if you don't put them out there, they're going to put the IEDs in the ground. So, chicken or egg here. You're either out there precluding IEDs from being put in the ground, or you're not out there and you're getting blown up. All of that was a major contributor. It's not the only one, but it was a major contributor to why we didn't put these trucks on the road. So they're sitting in this lot, baking in the sun and the sand all day long. Fast forward to 2015. I'm in my office, and in walks one of my guys, and he's like, "Hey, check out this video that one of the teams took off, the insurgency." And it's a video of ISIS celebrating an attack on that town that I mentioned, Baghdadi, which was right outside of Al-Assad. And they had killed a bunch of the 7th Iraqi Army guys. And they're celebrating, and they're defiling the bodies on the ground, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. And their guy's videoing, and he's panning the camera across. And just as he does, I notice there's this glimpse of, I'm like, hey, rewind that video. And he rewinds it. And lo and behold, there's one of those Ford F-250 trucks, completely stripped, no wheels, missing quarter panels, missing the bed, sitting on blocks in this garage-like overhang. And I'm like, there it is, man. Right there is the visual illustration of our failure. That was meant to be a program. There was probably, I don't know how many millions of dollars worth of these trucks that sat in a lot for 10 years, and now look where they are. Stripped, gone, who knows, not being used for Iraqi law enforcement, not being used by Iraqi military to stave off an organization like ISIS. In fact, now they've been chopped, they've been gutted, they've been sold on the black market for meltable metal. Who knows what they've been using them for? And the insurgents are sitting here, celebrating their victory of just crushing these Iraqi army guys that my guys, even worked to train between 6 and 10. It was just mind-numbing. That picture is driving out of Al-Assad to Baghdadi, and those are Iraqis. Those are Iraqi 7th Army guys that we would accompany, and we were headed out to one of those key leader engagements once we started owning battle space, and that became a regular thing for me. I would have to go out and manage these key leader engagements with the local sheikhs and the so-called political leader who had been voted in. I don't know whatever happened to that guy, but it also included guys from the Iraqi police and other Iraqi army leadership. And we would do these on a pretty regular basis. That route we're traveling out is a route that bisects what was the most dangerous road in the world, in my opinion, Route Bronze. Some extraordinary number of IEDs going off all the time. And there are many stories, including our own, where guys were getting hit out there on that route. But yeah, we used to drive out in convoys with these guys. And so even to just go out and do a localized key leader engagement, your pucker factor's up and you're fully kitted and ready to go because you never know what you're going to get on the way out. And that was only about a 10-kilometer route that we traveled,
Wow.
uh, but just a dangerous area. Yeah, that's
And
what that is about.
and so the soldiers in these Humvees are Iraqis.
They are Iraqis, and they were mixed with us. So there were a handful of us, and then they were mostly Iraqis from the Seventh Army. Yeah.
As a major, as a commander of Marines, what was your assessment of these Iraqi forces? Did you have any trust that they'd be able to manage on their own once the U.S. pulled out?
I don't know how much thought I gave to it in detail, but I think my assessment was with the guys we were working with, they would be the equivalent of entry level Marines, maybe not even as good. The reliability of them showing up on a regular basis was poor. We had trouble recruiting them and we had trouble sustaining them. Many of them were insurgents in hiding. And, we would see some brand new weapon systems that we bought for these guys disappear, and then you'd kill some insurgents a couple weeks later, and lo and behold, there's a brand new M4 rifle, and you're like, oh, look at that, surprise, surprise. So we had a lot of trouble. We had a lot of trouble maintaining those elements. But I would offer to you that we probably viewed it compartmentalized in a compartmentalized nature, and so I think we probably naively assumed that even though the guys we're working with may be very elementary in their capabilities, hopefully leadership was being trained by the right people and was, going to be prepared to continue what we were doing in a manner that would improve them. We made a fatal flaw of using hope as a course of action. Hope is never a course of action. And obviously I saw that then in 15 when these guys got rolled over like not even a speed bump. ISIS flew through them. That is to say the ones that weren't already ISIS in the making, but ISIS certainly flew through these guys.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying whatever uniform they're wearing right now, um, these guys, I can't trust that these guys aren't actually gathering intelligence to pass on to the insurgent, or that they're going to be with the insurgency next week.
Oh, we absolutely knew that there were some, not all, but there were some guys from the Iraqi army who were dual hatting as insurgents. We knew that for a fact, and we captured some of them during those tours. But there were others that I mean, if there's a couple, there's a couple of dozen. It's just a matter of finding them.
The city is filled with folks who don't want them, that is the Marines here. Some of those actively participate in fighting to get rid of them. Others express their discontent simply in their passive, non-cooperative manner. But psychologically, they are just as bad for the Marines because we never know the difference. And a dark stare from an unknown person really would put the guys on edge.
Yeah.
That's the passage that came to mind as I'm looking at this photo, and I'm imagining you guys rolling by these guys. I mean, really keeping a close eye on them. But what comes to your mind when you think of that photo?
Yeah. So that photo epitomizes exactly what the passage is talking about, and it was a cultural thing and how they dressed. I get it, but when you go off to this environment, you've already been trained. You're going off to a fight, and then you start getting all these briefs and presentations about what the enemy is doing, how they might appear, what they might do. In terms of their daily actions and activities. And essentially, every bit of information you're learning is building the mountain of distrust, not only for the possibility of encountering the enemy, but of the population as a whole. It's just simply hardwired. You're going in there, and everybody in a 360-degree environment is bad until they're not bad. And so the longer you're there and the more you encounter incidents, whether it's a firefight or an IED strike and one of your guys getting hurt, the more the lack of trust builds. And you look and you're like, okay, the insurgents I pick up are dressed the same way as the people who are out on the streets. They're all freaking insurgents. We're just waiting. And your anxiety level grows, and it's just like you're constantly operating in this realm of expecting the worst case. And you'll hear guys with PTSD talk about operating in the red, right? There's this color code. I don't know who coined this idea, but when you're operating in the green, everything is passive, everybody's relaxed, and you're happy-go-lucky, and there's no stress in your life. And as you progress to yellow, it increases. As you progress to orange, it's increasing to the point where it's having an effect on your physiological makeup and your body and everything. And then if you're living in the red, man, watch out. These guys are the guys that are completely amped, ready to snap, ready to go. Well, we were all living in the red. And so you couple living in the red with everything you know and have been wired to both consciously and unconsciously about the lack of trust that you can have in the environment. And you see these people walking around dressed in these dark clothes, and they're the passive non-compliance, the passive disinterest that I'm talking about is they won't even look at you. And I think I referenced a story in there about, like, imagine a a parade of fire trucks and lights and stuff going off down your street. You're standing 10 feet away from it and you're not looking at it. It's not even catching your attention. Every kid in America would be looking at that. Every human would look and be like, oh, wow, look at the lights, look at the sounds, look at all that. And these guys aren't even looking your way, as a bunch of space age looking gun trucks are rolling through their town with, the chatter squawking over the loudspeaker boxes, and these massive weapons being oriented in their direction. And you're telling me you're not looking just out of curiosity, you're not paying attention. And so that distrust, coupled with the way they're acting, the way they're dressed, everything we've been sort of consciously and subconsciously hardwired to believe, the distrust of the environment, the fact that our fear is up and that we're waiting to get hit. It's not a matter of will you get hit, it's when will you get hit. It just constantly builds. I recollect the picture you're talking about. It was taken in a town called Dulab, which was a little hornet's nest. Anytime we went in there, we got hit, no matter what. It wasn't always killing somebody, but it was often we lost Marines getting killed in there, and it was almost always in the same locations. And the guys that were on the ground there were not doing a good job controlling these intersections and these junctures where this was happening. But there was, to a certain degree, freedom of maneuver for the insurgents in this town. And in fact, at one point, we killed a very high ranking emir in this town who was working for the insurgency. And we knew that they were in there. And so when you drive through this town, you see these guys dressed this way, and they're all military aged, and they're all acting highly suspiciously. And that's what it comes down to, is they're just being suspicious. You can't help but have that factor. And you're driving by and you're just waiting. How soon is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? And your head's on a swivel and you're watching these guys and you're thinking, like, am I ready? Am I ready to kill this guy? Because it's about to happen. And then I took the picture because I think at the time when I took the picture, I was hoping I would get enough imagery so I could go back and we could do an analysis to see if these guys were actually anybody on our target list. But over the years, as I look at the picture, I've been able to analyze it and be like, man, this epitomizes everything that created a large piece of the anxiety and fear that you have. And you're not walking around like you're in some class B terror film like Friday the 13th kind of fear. It's just this ever present, just under the surface, high level of anxiety, anxiousness, and nervousness of, like, am I ready to react? And it becomes exhausting. It absolutely physically wears the guys down. And then what happens is there's a transformation where that dissipates. And I've heard people refer to it as the 1,000-yard stare. I've heard people to refer to it as droning. You get to the point where none of it even freaking matters anymore. When you're out patrolling the streets, you've lost that sense of fear. Now you're just moving, you're existing. And many of our guys, I would say almost all of us at some point reach that level of exhaustion and that level of, I don't even care anymore. Whatever happens, happens. Just hurry up and get on with it so I'll know that it's happening. My guys had been working this area of this city for a while, and we had some Marines who'd been wounded. We were not enjoying success, and we were well aware of this insurgent outfit, the Abu Sarrah network, they were facilitators. They were trafficking foreign fighters in from other countries who were then fighting for the insurgency against us. And that foreign fighter trafficking included Syrians. It was rumored to include guys from Chechnya, from other countries, Iranians, you name it. and it was also facilitating weapons coming in from foreign countries. We could never prove any of that to be true or not because, when you're fighting dudes, you're not asking them what their nationality is. But we knew that this cell was bad. And so we were working this cell. We had been specifically asked to try and do ground intelligence work to crack the nut on it. Now, let me just give you some insight. This reconnaissance unit that I was with, although I was active duty, they were principally made up of reservists. And the majority of these guys were just an absolutely extraordinary group of human beings. Most of them were in law enforcement. And some of them were in like drug enforcement agency, Federal Bureau of Investigation. They were SWAT guys. They were localized law enforcement. So conducting raids and gathering intel and working streets was something that these guys came by naturally, which made it extraordinary when now you've got them collectively as a Marine fighting unit, right? Because you have your intel officer who's doing a lot to try to figure out what's going on the ground, but then you got these guys who are like, screw it, man, we'll go out there and we'll start busting our way of doing things back in the world and see what we can come up with. And so long story short, they narrow it down and they cracked the case. And they had set up in a somewhat linear, but staggered over 3 buildings, ambush. And we had a tip that these bad guys were going to try and do a hit on one of our outposts that was in the north end of this city. Anyway, they get in the house and they take over these positions and they're communicating with each other. Well, lo and behold, the next morning, up pull these 2 vehicles. And out of the vehicles jumped these guys. And there was, I want to say there was 10 to 12 of them in total, because some guys came up from the street as well. And they're handing out, like they popped the trunks and they're handing out machine guns and they're handing out rocket propelled grenades and they're handing out rifles and they're putting on masks and all this stuff. Well, they're literally on the street below my teams. And the teams are just stunned by this, like, holy crap, is this really happening? And, they set it up and boom, unleash all hell and blow these guys to hell and like just absolutely obliterate them. And you couldn't have asked for a more perfect ambush, a more perfect kill in a combat environment than what these guys did. One of my guys I actually put in for a Bronze Star with Combat Valor Distinguishing Device. Unfortunately, it got downgraded, but did one of the most amazing things. One of the insurgents was running away, and he was a couple hundred yards down the street. And this young guy, who probably weighed about 160 pounds, picks up this 30-pound cannon we call the SASR, a Special Application Scope rifle. It's a 50 caliber. I mean, it's like a it's a rifle, but it looks like a bazooka, right?
Right.
And he's leaning out the window and just boom, pulls the trigger. And the witnesses say like the guy's head turned into pink mist and the body's tumbling over itself. And to hit a guy on the run hanging from a window holding a 30-pound rifle that has the recoil of a sledgehammer is just like amazing, right? Anyway, we exploit this tremendous success. And there are some wounded, not ours, but theirs. And that's these 2 kids. We didn't know they were kids at the time. They were 13 and 15 years old. And a couple of my guys got some scratches and bruises. So they get the surgical flight up to the medical center. And I go over to the medical center to check on my guys. And I find out that these 2 kids are at the end of they were brought in as well. And I get into this extremely heated conversation with this nurse, and she's everything I guess I should have expected. She's upholding the medical side of the house and her requirement to treat life regardless of what it's like. But we enter into this ethical and moral dilemma in this moment. And I'm like, 30 minutes to an hour ago, these kids were arming themselves and they were returning fire and they were trying to kill United States Marines. And now here we are treating them as these poor little victims. And the nature of their wounds were pretty grotesque. The one kid was completely, his body was charred and split in 100 pieces, and it was just a puddle in a bag. But the other kid, and it was really more of what I was thinking at the time as I'm staring at him and I'm getting into this argument with this lady. And I'm like, what are you doing? Wasting your time protecting and trying to keep and preserve life on this piece of crap that was just trying to kill us. He's a rat. He's vermin. He needs extinction and extermination. And we should end this now. And I'm not going to sit here and defend myself for it. What I will simply say is it was exactly what I was in that moment. I was absent all emotion. I was absent feeling other than rage for my guys at the end of the same squad bay who were banged up. and my complete inability to process why we were treating insurgents as though they were, something special, and we were using every ability we had to preserve the life of this kid who immediately ago was trying to kill us. And it all just came out. I honestly was going through that in the moment. I was overcome, and believe me when I tell you, I'm not making an excuse, but I'm also going to tell you, I'm not the only guy that ever experienced that heightened level of emotion in that moment. The adrenaline is pumping. You're enraged. You've just gone through this. You're watching your guys at the end of the table getting treated, and you're angry, and then you're just like, holy freak, can this really be happening? And I mean, it was, like, I'm thinking this kid just needs to be killed right here. But you can't do that, because then something changed. What changed? I don't know. But in the 30 minutes or an hour from the time we scooped his ass off the ground and got him back to the surgical center, now that's murder. And I had a hard time not understanding that, but just coping with that. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But if he walks out of here right now and he picks up a gun and points it, now it's back to being justified. So going back to earlier in our discussion about some of the hamstringing nature of stuff, and I'm sure there's an ethical and legal and moral rule for why that has to be, but at the same time, you're like, how do you follow this sine wave of 1 minute he's legal to be killed, the next minute he can't, and it can be literally a matter of minutes, and circumstances changing, and then and the Marines are expected to process this stuff, right? And if you're an 18-year-old kid from podunk nowhere in America and you've never had experience with this, maybe you don't process it as fast. And you talked about what kind of decisions are commanders thinking about as they're in the overhead, floating and rotating. Sometimes this stuff is running through your head. You got to process these legalities and these things and make sure that what you're giving as guidance is being understood by your guys, so that they don't inherently run down the wrong rabbit hole and do something they're not supposed to. And I'm sure that other veterans of other wars would say, well, welcome to the club, fellas. That's exactly what was expected of you. But we were experiencing it for the first time, and there was tremendous difficulty with that. And emotionally, in this moment where I am talking through my absolute disdain for the existence of this kid laying on this table and how I think he should be shot in the head right there, I was experiencing something. And it's not who I am as a human being. And it's long, I've long moved beyond this. This is what we create in this environment. I'm not the anomaly. I'm not the one off who was just plumb crazy. This was normal. And you can say, that's not normal. That's disturbing. Okay, but this was normal in the environment. This is what I had to do many times to contain some of my guys. And we haven't talked about that, but there were some of my guys who had their own challenges during, or I should say our guys, who had their own challenges during the fight where, like, all right, brother, you're going to sit this one out tonight, because they're wired too tight. And you're like, you need a breather. Take a knee. You don't need to be on this raid. We're gonna have you stay in from the patrol, or whatever it might be, because some guys reached this level, and I was no exception. I reached a level where I don't know what, like, any instant could have changed that situation, and it could have gone any way. And I don't know if I was really well controlling it at that point.
You talk about the psychological liberation, that comes with kicking down doors, and in some respects, you're hamstrung and you're held back. In other respects, you're free to do things you'd never be free to do in the States,
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That
And
that whole thing to me was so, surreal, that you could take a good law-abiding young 18-year-old, grew up in Bible Belt Christian, Midwest, and it has lived a good moral, ethical life, and now you're telling them you're going to break and enter and you're going to probably kill somebody tonight. People think, well, isn't that what you train to do in Marines? Man, we're not robots. We're still human beings somewhere deep in our soul, wherever that may be. And you have to make that psychological leap. And we did have some guys that struggled with that, sometimes, and you got to kind of just coax them along. You lead first and they'll follow until they get to the point where they are now able to step into their role. And then you get the other guys who, reach the point, like I said, where, okay, you're at the high boil right now. We got to dial you back to a simmer for a little bit.